I wanted to make a video on, well, a number of videos on who I am as a person, to discuss some of my defining characteristics, to reveal who I am as a person, the kind of individual that I am inside of myself, certain things about myself that might not otherwise be easily understood by someone who doesn't know me very, very well. And so in this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about friendship and my view on friendship. And so let me start off by saying that more than anything else in my life, I value friendship. The reason I value friendship so highly is not because people, including friends, could never let me down or cause me pain, but rather because without having people in whom I have invested my life, I mean, what is the point of living? What is the point of existing? I'm certainly aware that other perspectives exist for why one should live besides that of living for another. For instance, the corporate capitalists communicate that I should live in order to accumulate more worthless physical possessions that cannot possibly love me or care about me, yet about which I am supposed to form emotional connections. The bourgeoisie traditionalists claim that I should marry some woman and have children, right? And then live for my family. Even though I have no desire to marry any woman, I don't have any desire to have any children of my own. The religious argue that my purpose in life must be to live for God. But I see no evidence that God exists, and therefore I find the prospect of worshiping God to be similar to worshiping Santa Claus. Many nihilists claim that I should stop caring about life and just kill myself or engage in certain activities that will lead to an early death. Meanwhile, the hedonists, they claim that the ultimate objective for my life should be to maximize pleasure. I think of Dorian Gray as a good example of that, right? Oscar Wilde's brilliant novel, really, or novella. Is a good example of that hedonistic philosophy. But I disagree with all of the previously listed philosophies that I've just discussed, as well as many others that I have not even mentioned. Of the previous of those philosophies I have mentioned, the idea of living for God, it's certainly the one that appeals, it has the greatest appeal to me, because it has the greatest purpose. But unfortunately, it has very little purpose unless God is actually real, which seems most improbable to me. Therefore, if I do not live for my friends, for what else can I live? I mean, I suppose I could live for the intellectual pursuit of knowledge, to desire to maximize my own understanding about the world and how the world functions. I could be like Descartes and think of, well, make my life's motto, I think, therefore I am. However, the value of great knowledge becomes far more valuable when it is shared. Kept to oneself, one's knowledge is simply that, one's knowledge. And knowledge should be shared and passed down from generation to generation. So ultimately, even the intellectually minded desire friends, or they at least desire pupils who will listen to them and who might ask questions, and at least develop some relationship. Now, I've noticed that there's a great difficulty that exists in forming friendships, and so one can argue certainly that the complex nature of forming friendships is difficult to overstate. Most people, most of the time, find it challenging to open themselves up to other people. Right? One does not need to be a philosopher or an intellectual to realize that when one opens one's mind to another, one places oneself in a vulnerable position. This is true for a number of reasons. Firstly, we may lose the friendship of others if we reveal too much about ourselves. Secondly, we may find that the other person in whom we trusted has taken or what we told him, right, in confidence, and shared it with someone else. Thirdly, even though every person has faults, that is that every person is only human, our wonderful society has instilled within our minds, talk about mind control, a desire to hide our imperfections, such that we pretend that they do not exist. Certainly, we seldom want to share our imperfections with other people, especially people who do not have the same imperfections as we do. We might be somewhat more willing to share our imperfections with someone who has the same imperfections as we have. Someone who struggles with alcohol dependency may admit his addiction to another alcoholic, but is probably going to find it incredibly difficult to admit that he has an addiction to someone who has no idea how difficult it is to overcome the addiction of alcohol as a result of never being an alcoholic. But let me examine my first point in more detail. If you recall, my first point of we might lose a friendship if we reveal to someone else too much about ourselves. So let me provide a personal example of what I mean by that. Imagine that there exists someone, and let me use the stereotypical, John Doe, who desires to be my friend and wants me to open up to him. I know quite well that if I truly open myself up to John, I have opened myself up such that John will get to see inside my mind and know my thoughts and my faults. In short, John would get to know the real me. Yet, if John gets to know the real me, will he accept me? Will he accept me for who I am? Or will he judge me? Or even worse than that, will he reject me? Does my life have faults or flaws that, if I reveal them to John, would cause him to say within himself, I don't want anything to do with Andrew anymore. I didn't know that Andrew was that kind of person. So, my general tendency is to say to myself, often without even thinking about it, okay, I'll be open with John to a certain point, but I don't want to be completely open, because my life contains too many recherche details that are too dangerous or risky to share. John might reject me, or John might share these details with somebody else. The third point, right, that I mentioned earlier, is likewise difficult for me, because often I find myself so concerned. And concerned why? Well, as a result of societal constructions of what we would call so-called, in quotes, reality, as created by powerful people in U.S. society. I think the corporations are a good example. Very big business interests that try to stress that we also at least pretend that we're so perfect. Well, so it's difficult for me to place myself in a position in which someone might realize that I am only human, and therefore, despite maybe some of my positive qualities, I still have struggles and difficulties in life. It is difficult when I try to engage in elenchos with myself, or to live the philosophical life as Socrates would say through the words of Plato. It is difficult sometimes for me to know exactly why I find myself hiding who I am from someone else who desires to be my friend, since one of the most obvious things in the world is that we all have imperfections as people. But even realizing this, even realizing that we still have imperfections, we find it difficult to reveal to one another, well, the metaphorical nakedness that is our fears, our mistakes, and our pains. Even when we know that the other person, the person that desires to be our friends, has similarly experienced his own fears, his own mistakes, and his own pains in life. And we know this because we know all people have. Right? Well, so I try to think to myself, how might we, considering what I've just said, how might we reduce the difficulty of forming friendships, forming true friendships, not Facebook friendships, or friendships where a friend is anyone who's not your enemy, but a real friendship in a I suppose Edwin William Wallace sense of the term, if you read Jane Porter's The Scottish Chiefs, or maybe even a friendship somewhat like Santiago and I think it's Manolin in Ernest Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea. How can we avoid being essentially, the proud Michael Henchard from The Mayor of Casterbridge? Well, which, by the way, this is a good book, and this is a good film series of Thomas Hardy's novel by the same name. So if you're interested in British literature, consider watching it and reading the book, as well as watching Spencer Tracy's The Old Man and the Sea. But let me say this, because I've gone off topic slightly. To me at least, before any true friendship can take place, the two potential friends must both trust one another. Yet, the ability to trust someone else is something that every person must sense from within himself. Absent trust, two so-called friends can never become true friends. Therefore, before even considering a friendship, two people must decide whether they can trust one another or not, or whether they can learn to trust one another or not. The difficulty of the situation is that trust often requires time in order to be built. It is very difficult, even if one senses that someone else is trustworthy, to right then and there open up to that individual and let that individual see the real you, rather than just a facade or a mirage of yourself, right? We all are good with putting on facades. But if trust can't occur absent time, right, and time is not possible in a given situation, then a friendship isn't possible, unless both friends can feel that they can trust the other without knowing the other, as well as, right, he or she might have ideally wished to know the other. But as I've already mentioned, few are the friendships in which two people just automatically, instinctively trust one another without spending a lot of time together and slowly learning to confide little by little in the other individual until the trust is built up. Secondly, even once a person believes he can trust another person sufficiently to reveal to that other person the real him, he may feel that the friend may judge him. Right? Ours is a judgmental society, filled with people who constantly compare their value with the value of others by making judgments about the other person or the other people in their society. Some of the judgments may be accurate judgments. Other judgments have no factual basis, but judgments are judgments regardless of their basis. And you should read Jane Austen's novels if you want to explore that point in further detail. She's written 6 great novels that are all about misunderstanding. But few people want other people to judge them, right? Because judging is a lot like criticizing, right? And who wants to be criticized for his beliefs or his actions? I mean, nobody likes being criticized. So, in my opinion, two friends should have a no judgment policy toward one another. Well, and just because that's kind of my own terminology now, my own language, I define a no judgment policy as a total acceptance policy, and a total acceptance policy, in my view, is when one friend can say to another friend, our friendship does not depend upon your altering or changing your behavior to fit my view of what is proper or improper behavior, right? So, I mean, this doesn't mean that friends can't give one another advice. Right? A large part of friendship is about the giving of advice. But advice is a word that denotes the possibility that the other person may choose not to listen to or follow the advice. A good friend is not someone who demands that the other friend in the relationship follow any or all of his advice. I mean, I suppose true friends should always recognize that when the other friend gives advice, the advice is given because the friend giving the advice cared enough to take the time to say something that might not have been exactly what the other friend wanted to hear. Yet, based upon a classic definition of friendship, at least my definition of friendship, one can hardly be a friend if one fears being able to give advice, or if one hates receiving the advice of another. I would say lastly, true friendship is such that requires each friend to risk being hurt by the other, right? I would never, at least I contend, that I would never purposefully want to hurt someone who I called my friend. I must admit that occasionally, everybody can have a bad day, and that includes myself, right? I score badly on a test, I get into temper, right? So a true friend is a person who recognizes that even if his friend acts badly toward him, that does not give him the right, or if he wants to be a good friend at least, it doesn't give him the right to respond badly back. And a true friend should not desire to respond back with some snide comment, or get back at you, remark, or retort. Um, if we were all perfect, and which of course we're not, we would, if we were the kind of people that would never ever say something to someone we call our friends that would be hurtful to them, we wouldn't be people. We would all be gods, right? Or deities of some sort, and that would change the whole dynamic of a relationship with one another. But since we are but human, we all fail, and genuine friends are the people who do not allow failure or setbacks to ruin what could be a beautiful relationship. Well, in my opinion, a true friend, if we're talking about like a termination of a friendship, a true friend is someone who only ever ends a friendship after the other person in the friendship makes it unequivocally and unmistakably clear that he no longer wants anything to do with the original friend, right? Which, by the way, I've had this happen to me in life. In this situation, in my view, a true friend must learn to let go, and not let go out of hatred, but rather out of love. Which, it's hard, by the way, to do that. But ultimately, every true friend should want the best in life for those he calls his friends. And if that means separation or even termination of the friendship, then so be it. But absent a requested termination, a true friend should never forget the person whom he calls his friend, regardless of what behaviors or actions the other person engages, right? I mean, that doesn't mean that a true friend must endorse the behavior of another friend, right? Or feel that he can't advise a friend to act in a particular way regarding a given behavior, because you can do that. But a true friend must not abandon the person to whom he calls a friend just because that friend got himself in trouble with the police, for example. The police love getting people in trouble, by the way. So, but a true friend can't abandon a fellow friend because that friend became, socially taboo, right? To continue to be associated with, right? Either because of a physical disfigurement, or maybe a criminal record, or something of those sorts. True friendship can't be based on all these different conditions, or it's not true friendship. And so, I would argue that friendship is only real friendship when unconditional love exists. And obviously, unconditional love